After months and months of watching Hersheypark enthusiasts clue-seeking and predictions on what the RMC Wildcat at Hersheypark would be, the day was finally here to ride Wildcat's Revenge on its opening day. It just feels like everything went by so fast, like all the information kept building up and was arriving before I knew it. First, there were signs of the trains going into maintenance and markers around the structure. Then, Wildcat announced its closure. Then, Hersheypark announced they were going to announce the new RMC Wildcat coaster. Then, they announced Wildcat's Revenge, and little did I know how much this coaster would absolutely shock me and impact my rankings, along with my overall view of Hersheypark and their coaster lineup. Since Wildcat's Revenge opened up and I got to experience it, I firmly believe now that Hersheypark has the best top 3 out of any other park in the continent, putting the park at an overall position for first or second best coaster lineup in the continent. I've seen the cycle multiple times of a new RMC being announced, it being hyped up and having videos on YouTube come out saying stuff like best RMC ? Best coaster in the world ? And then I see people riding it for the first time with rave reviews. A few weeks later, I end up getting to ride it and I'm often left with feelings of disappointment and like the ride was overhyped. Wildcat's Revenge was the one exception to this pattern, as it more than pleasantly surprised me with its sheer power and variety, and the way the coaster takes on each element. At the time I went on opening day, there were very few reviews for Wildcat's Revenge, with there being mostly just reaction vlogs where it was hard to get a solid idea of what everyone's takes were on the ride, due to the lack of reviews that have come out already. But little did I know how surprised I would be by the ride experience. On opening day, the line was about an hour and a half, which is a lot less than everyone was expecting it to be, given the fact that it was a Friday and the opening day to the public of that ride. Wildcat's Revenge is a similar locker system to Steel Vengeance and Velocicoaster, except for the fact that there are no metal detectors. You can wait with all your stuff in line, but before boarding the stairs up to the station, you must put all your items in the locker, regardless of whether you have zippered pockets or not. No exceptions. This is personally my favorite loose article policy, simply because you can wait in line with all your stuff, and you also don't need to worry about putting your loose items in the station bins, which slows down boarding. And don't need to worry about securing them tightly while riding if you don't have pockets of zippers on you. Unlike other RMCs, this has a load and unload station with 3 trains, which is a good thought on Hersheypark's part, because they had an idea just about how popular and crowded this attraction would be. Let's say, for example, Wildcat's Revenge had the exact same capacity as Iron Gwazi, with only 2 trains running with the same amount of crowds it had on opening day. This ride would have been a low capacity disaster, with the wait probably building up to around 3 to 4 hours. The only downside to this capacity is dispatch time. Because this is a new ride, there are always operational kinks that need to be figured out, which can take away time from the loading cycle, which at one point took 4 minutes to dispatch an entire train due to a sensor issue. I imagine these kinks will take around a month to figure out, and then after that, the dispatch times will take a lot shorter, giving the ride much better capacity. Now let's start with the ride layout. Just a note, I have not ridden towards the front, so I will not be able to analyze what elements feel like what in the front. Since the ride ops are very strict about assigned seating on opening day, I only got the back row a couple of times, and then the middle rows on other times. Unlike most RMCs, every element felt the same in the middle and back rows, except for the first drop, which is a much stronger ejector feeling in the back. When the train exits the station, you get a moderate pop of ejector airtime in the back, and mild floater airtime in the middle rows. The next part of the ride is my favorite pre-lift section out of any other coaster. The way the ride throws you up and down and side to side rapidly makes me absolutely laugh and put a smile on my face. Then comes my least favorite part of the ride, the loud lift hill. This is an underrated loud lift hill, and it's basically as loud as Steel Vengeance, maybe even louder. I always end up needing to tightly cover my ears as the train hits the lift hill because of how loud it is. Something else about this lift hill that is different from on most RMCs is how slow it goes in the beginning. Because this is the only RMC to run 3 trains without a mid-course brake run, the lift hill ends up needing to go extremely slow in order to balance out the block zones of the ride. In the beginning of this lift hill, it gives a pulsing sensation like the lift hill is pushing you back and forward repeatedly, which I found kind of odd. The first drop is average for an RMC, giving strong ejector airtime in the back row. I would say this drop is on par with Steel Vengeance and Wicked Cyclone's drop, but not as good as the one on Iron Gwazi. The next element is probably the most underwhelming one. Everyone hyped up the underflip, thinking it would give insane whippy hang time, but instead, it just gives weaker and more graceful floater hang time, along with subtle and graceful laterals. But the next part of the ride is really where it starts to pick up the action. The next Camelback hill is the most insane and sustained ejector airtime I have ever felt on an RMC, boosting you violently out of your seat and sustaining you there for a good 3 seconds. This airtime hill really makes you feel like your stomach is going up and trying to push its way up to your throat. The next element is extremely rapid fire. You get a violent pop of ejector airtime along with a violent lateral jolt to the right at the exact same time. The wave turn that follows delivers exceptional sideways ejector airtime, stronger than any other sideways, non-banked wave turn on a different RMC, unlike the one on Iron Gwazi, which banks right as the element starts. But this is just an appetizer of what's to come. The next 0G stall is the second best I've experienced, being on par with the one on Air Force 1, even though it's so much shorter. It violently whips you in and out of the element, and midway through the stall you get a sudden burst of upside down ejector airtime. Then comes the absolute wildest element of the ride, the second sideways wave turn. Remember when I said the first sideways wave turn was better than any other sideways wave turn on an RMC? Well, this is the best sideways wave turn I have ever experienced. The level of ejector airtime you get is shockingly violent, and to be honest, it might be one of the top 3 most violent moments of ejector I've ever experienced, period. You get violently ejected to the side and then get abruptly slammed back into your seat. This is the strongest I've ever felt the sensation of being abruptly slammed back into my seat. Right after the wave turn is another overwhelmingly violent moment of the ride. As the train enters a double up, you get a strong and violent pop of ejector, and then right as you slam back into your seat, you feel an abrupt lateral jolt that will throw you to the side of the train. This is because the middle of the double up does not have any banking. You then get ejected again on the drop off of double up, and while you're getting ejected, you get a second dose of laterals that will throw you to the right side of your seat, at the same time as you are out of your seat. This is a crazy sensation that's so hard to find on any other roller coaster. Next is one of the 2 0G rolls on the ride. This next one is by far the best 0G roll I've experienced. As you enter the element, you get a sudden and violent burst of ejector airtime that comes out of nowhere, and then the airtime leads into a mix of strong hang time and laterals that will slam you to the side of your seat. The next turn has by far the strongest positive Gs I've ever felt on an RMC. I don't think I've really felt any positive Gs on an RMC, except for Iron Gwazi, where there are slight positive forces on the valley after the drop, but on this overbank, you get strong positive Gs that at one point almost got me to gray out. I was shocked to see these strong positive Gs on an RMC coaster. The next 0G roll is not as good as the one prior, but it does give some decent whip and hang time. Then comes a mini sideways airtime pop. Surprisingly, this element didn't really give any airtime, instead, just a minor dose of laterals. Then comes 2 amazing and thigh-crushing moments of ejector airtime. The first one is an off-axis ejector hill with, again, shockingly violent airtime. This moment is not as sustained, and it only lasts less than a second. The final airtime hill has very weird profiling. It ejects you violently out of your seat, and then the profiling at the end has a kink to it that will laterally slam you to the side. I don't know if they did this on purpose, but I absolutely love it. And it's such a great end to a ride so violent like this. You then abruptly slam into the brakes. Every time the ride hits the brakes, I basically just sit on the brake run thinking, what did my whole body just go through? And I even have that thought after every ride. I even have a smile on my face from when the ride hits the brakes until I exit the train, which I don't necessarily have on any other coaster besides Wildcat's Revenge. What really makes this ride as great as it is the unreal and dreamlike pacing it has. When the speed-corrected POV of this coaster first came out, I was underwhelmed by how the pacing looked. But little did I know how far from the truth that speed-corrected POV was. This coaster has pacing that only a coaster enthusiast would see in their dreams. If this coaster didn't have pacing this good, then the coaster actually went through each element like on a speed-corrected POV, then this would be an upper mid-tier RMC, and probably land in my upper top 10 or top 15. But because the pacing on this ride changes too much for me and makes the elements feel 100 times more insane, I'm proud to say that this is, spoiler alert, my new #1 roller coaster. This is by far the most underrated RMC I've ever ridden, and I don't understand why this coaster doesn't get the same praise as rides like Iron Gwazi, Steel Vengeance, and some even say Air Force 1 is better than this, which I can't even see why. I really hope they don't add trim brakes to this ride, because something I have seen a lot is that the structure is starting to sway a bit like on Steel Vengeance, mostly because the train goes through each element so fast and the pacing is so strong. Something the park might have to do if it gets out of hand is add trim brakes, which I really hope they don't do, because then the ride might even drop in my rankings. Overall, this ride, of course, is getting a 10 out of 10. There is nothing wrong with this ride that I can find besides just the swaying of the structure, which doesn't even impact the ride experience whatsoever. I'm still beyond shocked that nobody has praised this coaster as much as some of the other top tier RMCs, and I firmly believe that Wildcat's Revenge should be getting much more praise than it has been since it's opened. Thanks for watching, and see you all next time.